Hey there, welcome to or welcome back to No Prance Profits. My name is Richard and I'm here in downtown Miami at the Adrian R. Center to meet a Kennedy. Now, this Kennedy is actually interesting. I have been to a Trump rally, I have been to a Biden rally before, but this guy might decide the 2024 election. I come here with kind of an open mind, kind of to understand, because the media skews things a lot of different ways, so I want to see the truth. I want to hear it from the horse's mouth. I am a fan of crypto. I'm a fan of minimal government regulation. You know, this is Kennedy's first real event since he's filed as an independent. Now, this is very different from other events that I've seen before, but I want to take you along, show you what's going on, and everything like that. So let's go to the Kennedy 2024. Now running as an independent, he's going to take votes away from either Trump, who's probably going to be the Republican nominee, or Biden, or Clinton, or Kamala, or whoever's going to actually be the Democratic nominee. But let's go ahead and let's see Kennedy. I'm going to bring you kind of as unbiased as I can. I like a lot of the opinions I've seen on the website, but let's go in. No big signs, no big banners, nothing like that. Not a huge crowd either. But we'll go in, take a look around, and see what Robert Kennedy, yeah. John F. Kennedy was the president already. What Robert Kennedy has to offer. So join along with me at the Adrian R. Center in downtown Miami. So there is no Secret Service or anything like that. It's just local cops here and Evolve that they're using. This is like inside the Arch Center. I'm literally the only person here. And you can see they've got t-shirts and buttons and stuff like that. But this is the quietest presidential event I've ever seen before. So I guess we're going this way?
Yes, sir. Go down the hallway.
Okay.
You'll see the door.
Thank you. So we're going in. Again, I'm literally the only soul here. I don't know what Kennedy's going to say or anything like that, but I am for security. There's no building crazy security, like people are going in and out of doors. But we've got 2024 Kennedy, likely the guy who's going to mess with the election. I hate to say, but true at the same time.
And but there's something else happening with housing, because inflation's driving up food, childcare, health, but nothing like housing. So what is it? Well, part of the reason is there's three giant companies, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, who all own each other. So it's really one giant company. And they already own 88% of the S&P 500. So they own our economy. And now they've decided that they want to own all the farmland, and they want to own all the residential housing, and particularly some of their subsidiaries, Blackstone, which is owned half by BlackRock and half by Vanguard, is targeting single-family homes. So already they control 5% of the market, and that alone, that marginal asset, the marginal part of the asset, when you buy 5%, it drives up the entire market. So that's what we're looking at. They're targeted to control between 40 and 60% within 6 years. Oh, that means we're turning, and they're turning us into a nation of renters instead of owners. Home ownership is so critical, because if you own a home, you care about your community, you care about your schools, you care about your hospital, you care about the police protection. You pay attention to it. You take care of your yard, your home, you paint your house. You care about your neighbors. You feel like you're part of a community. More importantly, it gives you an automatic entree to the capitalist system. Because if you own a home, you have an asset, and you can borrow against it. You can borrow money, and that means you're a participant in capitalism. So if you want to take a second mortgage on your house and bet it on something small like a sewing machine, or something big like a restaurant or retail outlet, you can do that. And that's why, there was a 50-year period after World War II when our country, the economists called the Great Prosperity. Our country during that period became the American middle class became the greatest economic engine in the history of mankind. When I was a boy, when my uncle was president, we owned 50% of the wealth on earth. We were the biggest exporter of goods on earth. And that it all started with this essentially almost universal home ownership that happened after World War II when we passed the GI Bill and we got every American into a home that wanted one, and a lot of other legislation, and that made us all part of the capitalist system. And it also makes you part of democracy. Thomas Jefferson said, American democracy is rooted in tens of thousands of independent freeholds owned by individuals, by families, by Americans, and each with a stake in our economy and our system of government. And today we're moving away from that model, which was the American and the democratic model, back to the feudal, the colonial model, or the feudal model where the landlords own everything, and we all become renters, and then we know we're no longer citizens, we're now subjects. It allows us to be serfs on our own land and have our sovereignty robbed from us as well. I'm running against two presidential candidates who both are running on the platform that they brought great prosperity to this country. And when I mention that to people, I spend a lot of time talking at kitchen tables to individual Americans and to families, to couples. And when I mention that to them, they feel like they're being gaslighted because they're not experiencing prosperity. They're experiencing unprecedented desperation. And not only economic, but in a disintegration of the social fabric of public health, mental health, institutions that they no longer believe in. That the entire framework of democracy seems to be crumbling to them. And today, and the assumptions that we had today, the average income in this country is $5,000 less than the cost of basic human needs of food, transportation, and housing. So if you get just what you need, and that doesn't mean good food, it means, the cheap food is poison now in this country. It doesn't have nutrition. Food that you buy in most grocery stores lacks nutrition, and it actually contains a lot of poisons. So eating that lousy food and doing the minimum of everything else, you're still $5,000 in debt at the end of the year. How are Americans paying that debt? How are they getting from year to year? Why? They're putting it on their credit cards. And Visa, MasterCard, Wells Fargo, Chase, Citibank, and Morgan are charging them 22% interest. If Mafia did that, they would go to prison. It's called loan sharking. But if those companies do it, it's just business as usual. Who do you think owns every one of those companies? BlackRock. So, and what does BlackRock's America look like? It looks like a lot of people having to make choices that are heartbreaking. I talk to the children of elderly parents or the parents themselves all the time who are cutting up their prescription pills in two to make them last the end of the week so they can buy food or pay for home heating oil. I talk to people all the time who said this, but a kid told me recently, like a 25-year-old kid said, every Tuesday he has to make a choice about whether to buy a meal or to fill his car up with gasoline. I talk to young parents who are living in rentals they no longer afford because the concentration of ownership has now driven up the cost of rentals. So 48% of Americans who are renting believe they cannot afford their rent. So they're sitting in that apartment holding a crying baby on their lap and having to argue with each other about whether that baby is $50 sick or $100 sick or $500 sick before they bring them to a hospital. And 57% of Americans cannot put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency. And if you're in that category and the engine light comes on in your car, it is the apocalypse. It's the end of the world. Because you can watch your life. You can see the future. And the future is your life circling the drain. you know you can't afford that mechanic. You know that you're going to then won't be able to drive to work. You're going to lose your job, then you're going to lose your home. And you're going to end up on the sidewalk like all of those people in San Francisco who aren't drug addicts, who aren't mentally ill, who just had a little string of bad luck, and they fell off the gerbil wheel. They fell off the gerbil wheel, and they're living on the street. And there's 35% of our population is this far from homelessness. So, and by the way, well, let me just say this. You know what it's like to drive around with your engine, when the fuel gauge of your car is on empty, and the anxiety that causes you. You're thinking, am I going to make it to the gas station? And it focuses your mind so much that it makes you stupid. You lose IQ, because that's all you can think about. Now amplify that anxiety because you have 2 kids in the back seat of the car, one in a toddler seat. And now amplify it by more because you're driving through a bad neighborhood. That's the way that half our population spends every day with that level of anxiety because they can watch what's happening to their lives. They're waking up with a sense of impending doom. This was never true about our country. Our country is a country of optimism. And now we're a country of anxiety and manipulated by fear. And you remember during the COVID pandemic when they shut down 3.3 million businesses? So I'm suing Amazon and Elizabeth Warren for censoring a book that Joe Mercola and I did during the pandemic that was critical of the lockdowns. So Amazon censored it while they were raking in billions from lockdowns. Amazon got to close all of its competitors for 2.5 years. And then they taught us all, the whole lockdown was a lesson in how to learn how to use Amazon. I didn't know how to use Amazon before COVID. My kids did, I didn't. But I'll tell you, it's magical. You just find something you like, a picture, and you hit send, and it's in your driveway the next day. And so, of course, it's very seductive. 41% of the black-owned businesses that close will never reopen. A lot of those had 3 generations of equity in them, of generations of families that were putting money, or putting the intelligence, their resourcefulness into that business. They're going, I drive through places like Watts, like Harvard Lee in Cleveland, and again, it's acres of plywood. These were thriving businesses that enriched this community, but we closed all the retailers here. And you say that's okay because I'm still getting my stuff on Amazon. But that local retailer was paying taxes in this community. And that was the guy who was hiring your kid during the summer break. That was the guy who had a plaque on his wall from the local Boy Scout troops thanking him. That was the guy who pays for, my kids' hockey jerseys and Little League uniforms, etc. And he's gone now. At least Amazon's paying local taxes here, right? No. Well, at least they're paying federal taxes. No. Last year, 0. So they're doing it right in front of us. They're just strip mining the wealth and equity. They're vacuuming it, and they're bringing it up where during COVID, there was a $4 trillion shift in wealth from the American middle class to a new generation of billionaires, 500 new billionaires in 500 days. We created a billionaire a day through those policies. And, and that's what, that and the war machine. I saw President Biden when he came back from Vietnam and he went to Hawaii and he gave a 9/11 memorial and in Hawaii. And he said, during that speech, he said that the World Trade Center collapsed because they hate us for our freedoms. So I was surprised at that because That was something George Bush said, and the Democrats for 20 years have been ridiculing him for it. And I went on Neil Cavuto the next day, and I said, that was propaganda. And that was just, there was no basis for that. Osama bin Laden was very clear about why he bombed the World Trade Center. He said it again and again. He said, I bombed it because the US put 2 bases in Mecca, next to Mecca. And he said, I used to love the United States. They were supporting me. They were fighting side by side with me, us in Afghanistan, against the Russians. I had no beef against the United States until they put the bases in Mecca. We have 800 bases around the world right now. And each one of them is picking a fight with somebody. Some local people are incredibly resentful at the presence of that base. And that doesn't mean we close them all, but what we're doing now, the way we're doing it, is not making America safer. So I went to Poland with my dad when I was in 1964, a year after my uncle was killed. And I went with my mom and 3 of my siblings. And at that time, everybody wanted American products. When I traveled abroad with my father, strangers would come up and want to buy my blue jeans. They wanted American transistor radios, RCA Victrolas, television sets. They wanted our automobiles were the gold standard automobile in the world. Everybody wanted an American car. That was the most prestigious thing you could own. We went shopping. My mother took us shopping before we went to Poland to buy gifts, clothing and toys, American made. The kids in Warsaw for an orphanage there. And the communist government did not want us in Poland. My father had been invited by a democracy group there, and the communists blacked out any mention of our visit in all the state-owned media, which was the only media available in Poland. And in fact, when we went to give those gifts to those little kids in the orphanage, the government had come in and removed all the children to make sure there was no contact. 2 days later, we went to Krakow to see the Cardinal at the Cathedral of the Black Madonna. He was a living saint. He had stood up to the communists. He had resisted. He had been in prison. He had been tortured. He had endured that suffering with such dignity and piety, and he had inspired a religious revival in the Catholic Church all across Poland. And everybody knew as soon as he died, he was going to be beatified as a saint. So for us, these little Catholic kids, had been reading the lives of the saints every night for our whole lives. Going to see a living saint was the biggest thrill of our lives. When we went up there, Krakow Square was empty. It was one of the biggest squares. It looks like a mile long. And the only thing in it was the embassy limo, which had brought us there. And we went up, we spent about 3.5 hours in the cathedral and in the rectory meeting with the cardinal. When we came out, there were 1 million people waiting for us. So the word of our presence had spread by word of mouth. The entire population of Krakow had emptied out and come to the square. The businesses had closed. And our car, that limo, was stuck in the sea of humanity. We couldn't move for 2.5 hours. My father hauled us up on the roof of the limo, and he gave a speech to the crowd. And then they started singing to us, "Sto lat," which means "May you live forever." And then they broke into a song that was illegal. It was a criminal act. It was an anti-communist song, anthem that they sang at that time. And they sang it again and again and again, 1 million people. And I was a little 11-year-old kid, signing autographs on that car for the first time in my life. And watching this crowd, people with tears coming down their face, these expressions of joy, this just electricity, and people, all of them reaching up to touch some member of my family. That same trip, we went to France, to Germany, to Italy, to Greece, and the UK, and saw the same crowds everywhere we went. They didn't hate us for our freedoms. They loved us for our freedoms. It's only when we started betraying those freedoms people started hating us. Eisenhower gave what today we have to look at as the most important speech in American history, where he warned against the emergence of a military-industrial complex that would transform America into an imperium abroad and a surveillance state, a garrison state, and a national security state at home. And my uncle came in with the same impulse to resist that. 4 months in, he was lied to by the top 3 CIA, Allen Dulles, Richard Nixon, and Charles Goodell, and his Joint Chiefs into the Bay of Pigs. And when those men were dying on the beach, and heartbreaking to him, he publicly took blame for it. But he said they knew they were going to die. What they believed, if they sacrificed them, it would force my uncle, which is giving nutrition to millions of malnourished kids around the world. I want them to think of the Alliance for Progress and USAID, which he created to give aid to put America on the side of the poor, to grow middle classes, which can make democracy sustainable all over the world. And because of that commitment, there are more statues today to John Kennedy, more boulevards, avenues, streets, universities, hospitals, parks, neighborhoods named after him, and any other president of the United States in Africa, Latin America, Asia, and probably more than all the other presidents combined. People love us for our freedoms, and they want us to be a moral authority, and they want us to be a real leader at night, and they know the difference between bullying and leadership, which our leaders have forgotten. And my uncle, his closest advisors, the people he really loved, like Max Taylor, General Maxwell Taylor, Bob McNamara, Dean Acheson, Abraham Harriman, all told him, you got to send 250,000 troops to Vietnam or the government's going to collapse. And he said, it's their government, it's their fight. We cannot make this an American fight. And ultimately, he sent 16,000 troops, which were advisors, Green Berets mainly. And they, by the rules of engagement, they were not allowed to participate in combat. Some of them did. And on October 22nd, 1963, he learned that a Green Beret had died. And he asked Walt Rostow to bring him a casualty list. And Rostow brought it back, 75 Americans had died in Vietnam. And he said, that's too many, I'm gonna bring them all home. That afternoon, he signed National Security Order 263, ordering all US personnel out of Vietnam by 1965, with the first 1,000 coming home. 16,000 troops, by the way, were fewer people than he sent to Oxford, Mississippi to get one black man into Ole Miss. So it wasn't a great number. He ordered them all home with the first 1,000 coming home in December of 63. Which was a month later, exactly 30 days to the day that he signed that order, he was murdered. And a week after that, President Johnson remanded the order, sent 250,000 troops over, and it became America's war for 20 years. And then Eisenhower, or Nixon comes in, sends 560,000. We killed 1 million of them. 56,000 of our kids never came home, including my cousin, George Skakel, who died in the Tet Offensive. My father ran against that war in 68. When it looked like he was going to win, at that moment he was killed. Martin Luther King, who had made himself a peace activist, split from a lot of the other civil rights leaders and said, he understood, you can't be exporting violence and not bring it home. He and my father collaborated because they saw the war was robbing the war on poverty here. We had to choose whether, what our democracy looked like, whether we were going to be an imperium of democracy and take care of our people. And so, 1,000 million, we pushed Iraq into a proxy posture with Iran, which is exactly the foreign policy outcome we should have been avoiding. We created ISIS. We drove 2 million refugees into Europe and destabilized all the democracies in Europe for a generation. Brexit was a direct result ultimately of the Iraqi and Syrian conflicts, and what's happening with the riots today in France is the same thing. And so that's what we got for that price, and at home, you know, we're all paying for it. We gutted our middle class, and now we got another war, $113 billion that we committed in March, and then last week another $24 billion to Ukraine, a war that should have never been fought. The Russians tried twice to settle it on enormously generous terms for Ukraine and for us. They wanted very little. And we torpedoed those agreements because we wanted a war, and that is really, really clear. And when we committed the $130 million, and by the way, $130 million, the entire budget for EPA is $12 billion. So that's all we got for the environment in this country. We're sending 12 times that to Ukraine. And this is just the beginning. This is going to be $500 billion, even if they war end today, because now we have to rebuild the country. And we're, you know, when we committed that money in March of 2022, that same month, we cut food stamps for 30 million Americans, from $283 a month to $23. Try living on that. We cut 15 million Americans from the Medicare rolls. And that same month, the Fed printed $300 billion extra dollars, unanticipated, to pay off the Silicon Valley Bank. So when the bankers need it and the military industrial complex needs it, we got plenty. All they want, just write the check. But when Americans who are starving, who are sick, who need help, who need medical care, when they want it, there's nobody home. And that month, Mitch McConnell was asked by a reporter, can we really afford to send $113 billion to Ukraine? And he said, don't worry, it's not really going to Ukraine. It's going to US military contractors. So it's good for our country. Oh, he just admitted that it's just a money laundering scheme for Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Lockheed. Who do you think owns every one of those companies? BlackRock. Right, and then I saw the Republican debate, 2 weeks ago, and they're all arguing about who's going to outdo the other, except for Vivek, who got beat up for voicing any kind of a challenge to the orthodoxy about Ukraine. The other ones were all outdoing each other about how much more they're going to put in there. And Tim Scott pipes in and says, hey, everybody, don't worry. It's not a gift to Ukraine. It's a loan. Raise your hand if you think that loan's going to ever be paid back. Okay, so why do they even, everybody knows that it's not ever going to be paid back. So why do they call it a loan? They call it a loan because when you write it as a loan, you can impose conditions on Ukraine. What are the conditions? Well, one, of course, a brutal austerity package that makes sure that if you live in Ukraine, you're never going to get anything from the government if you're down on your luck. But more importantly, it requires Ukraine to sell all of its public assets. So it's roads, it's, ports, airports, whatever they got. Most importantly, it requires them to sell all of the agricultural land in Ukraine. Ukraine's got the richest agricultural land in the world. Every big corporation wants to get their hands on it. Yeah. There's 1,000 years of wars fought over that land. It's the breadbasket of Europe. People joke in the Ukraine that if you throw a boot on the ground in Ukraine, it will grow something that you can eat. And everybody wants it. My son went over there and fought in Ukraine, and I'm very sympathetic to Ukrainian people. This war has not helped them. So what the loan agreement requires is they put all that land up for sale. The international corporation, 30% has already been sold. And the biggest buyers, almost all of it, to DuPont, Monsanto, and Cargill. Who do you think owns all of those companies? Yeah, BlackRock. And now, this new $24 billion, it includes a package for rebuilding the Ukraine. Who do you think got the contract? BlackRock. So they're doing it right in front of us. You know, the head of BlackRock, Larry Fink, is on the board of the World Economic Forum. And the World Economic Forum meets, the Billionaires Boys Club, they meet in Davos every year to plan what the world will look like for the rest of us. And they call that reorganization the Great Reset. And when Klaus Schwab, at the head of it, was asked, what is the Great Reset? And he said, it means you will own nothing and you will be happy. So they are on their way to making sure we don't own anything, because they are owning everything. And, you know, how do they keep this going, this racket? They keep it going by keeping us fighting each other. Right? Blacks against whites, whites against Hispanics, Republicans against Democrats, natives against migrants. They keep us all with these culture war issues that are insolvable. You know, they're important, but they're not the actual thing that we should be thinking about. Nobody's talking about it. At that Republican debate, nobody mentioned what's happening now with the housing market and with BlackRock, and the real issue. It's like the jangling keys. All these culture war issues, you look at it over here, everybody, and meanwhile you're robbing the bank over here. When the king and queen look out over the balustrades of their castle and they see all their subjects fighting each other, they go back to the banquet and they pop champagne corks. Because they know as long as we're all fighting each other, then nobody's coming over the castle wall. And I'm so grateful for in Miami, but all over the country, in the middle of the day in Miami, in the workday, so many people come out. There's an energy now that we're seeing that no other campaign has. We have 220,000 volunteers. Nobody's got anything like it. We have bigger crowds than anybody. And it gives me hope for our country. I want to give those kids back their hope. You know, back that scene that I saw when I was a little boy in Poland. The whole world loving our country. We being a moral authority for the rest of the globe. We need to give that to our kids. And we're not going to do it under the current system. We need to go over the wall. So I need your help. Go to Kennedy24.com. If you give $5 if you can, get other people to do it, to get us their emails. And if you can't do that, volunteer or do both. And one of the things that you can do is wear a button, because wear a button, wear a t-shirt, wear a Kennedy hat, and put a lawn sign on. Because the way I can win this, you know, I don't have much support. I get a lot of Republican support because they let me go on Fox News. But nobody will let me go on MSNBC or CNN, and nobody will interview me for the New York Times. They'll write bad articles, they'll say bad things, but they won't let people hear me talk. And so if you live in that bubble, if I live in that bubble where I only read CNN or the Times and MSNBC, I'd have a very low opinion of myself. What we find is that when people see me talk on a podcast or a long-form interview, that they can get converted very quickly. So we have to figure out a way to get a lot of those Democrats, and the people haven't seen me, to do that. And the way to do that is wear the hat, wear the merch. When people come up to you and put the lawn sign on, tell them, go look at Joe Rogan, go look at Jordan Peterson, go look at Olin Podcast, go look at Tucker Carlson interview, whatever. Once they start looking, they convert, and that's what we need to do across the board. So I said this in my announcement, I'll say it again: give me a sword and some ground to stand on, and I will win your country back for you. Thank you.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr., with your help, the next president of the United States. Now, we're going to ask our security here.
What's happening over there, a lot of people have a lot of misunderstandings about it, and I really would like, an hour just to talk about Israel. But Israel's our most important ally in the world. For a lot of strategic reasons, it is like an aircraft carrier in the Mideast. Right now, if Israel were destroyed, which is the objective of Hamas, that is their stated objective, to eradicate Israel and to kill the Jews who live there. That is what Hamas publicly states. Iran says the same thing, which directs and owns Hamas. If they did, Iran and China are one organism at this point. And they now, because of BRICS, they now control, and because of Iran's control of Venezuela, they control 90% of the oil supply in the world. If Israel was not there, China can blackmail the entire world with our energy supply. And that is the most disastrous foreign policy outcome. We don't have strategic interest for being in Ukraine. We have an absolutely critical, existential strategic interest for being in Israel. Israel for supporting them. Israel has never asked for troops. They never will. What they want is our support, and they want and they need some of our weapons. And we need to do that. This is putting aside the brutality, the savagery of that attack, and the whole history of Israel. Israel has a legal right to be there. It is not an occupying force. Israel was created in 1940 after the Ottoman Empire. That was a land without a ruler, without a country. And the British and the other nations in that time it was shared by Jews and Palestinian Arabs, Jews, Christians, and Muslims. They, again and again, the commission between World War I and World War II tried to work out an agreement where they could have one country, and they all came to the conclusion they couldn't. They decided to divide it into two countries, one which was majority Jews, the other which was majority Arabs. At that time, the part that was Israel was 548,000 Jews and 390,000 Arabs. It was created legally. It's recognized, and the only reason I'm going into this history is because there's this mythology that's now being promoted by Harvard kids and all of this, that Israel is somehow an occupying force. Israel we were the first country to recognize it. It's our oldest ally. We've been there for 75 years. Not only have the Jews continuously occupied it for 3,700 years, but everybody recognized after World War II the Jews need a safe haven. They need a country like my Catholic faith has a Vatican. Most of the countries in the Mideast are religious, are a single religion. Israel has more rights for its people than any other country in the Mideast. If you're an Arab, you want to control it and you want to criticize your government, you better be in Israel. If you're in the West Bank, you're going to be jailed or killed. If you're in Gaza, you'll be jailed and killed, and that's true all over. Palestinians vote in Israel. Jews do not vote in other Arab countries. They hold office. They serve on the judiciary, including the Supreme Court. There's nothing like that in any other country. The Jews are the only who allow complete freedom of expression. No other country in the Mideast allows that. The Jews are the only people who give rights to gays and to women. Saudi Arabia, a woman goes to jail for driving a car. There was 150,000 people in a gay pride parade a month ago in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. The same day they were pushing gays off of buildings and hanging them from cherry pickers in Tehran. We want to preserve freedom. We want to preserve the only democracy in the Mideast and our most critical strategic partner. And that is a very brief kind of just summary of some of the things that we need to be thinking about right now. And thank you for asking for the mention.
So I will say that speech, the whole thing was super interesting. Kennedy is still taking selfies with everyone here. There are about 300 people here. A lot of people say that it's, he's a conspiracy theorist and this and that, and I think he's just willing to talk to anybody that'll listen. I think the biggest conspiracy we heard was not about COVID, was not about, the CIA killing his uncle or anything like that, but the biggest conspiracy we heard today was about BlackRock and how they want to keep Americans poor and want to keep Americans fighting. But you can see he is taking the time to chat with, to take photos with everyone. That's where the thumbnail for this video came from and everything. And then, someone in the audience, after he finished his main speech, talked about Israel, asked about Israel, and he gave probably the best answer I've ever seen a politician give on Israel. I've watched a lot of news coverage, mostly on Twitter and stuff like that, but I do have to say, overall, I'm a Kennedy supporter, but I think the problem is nobody really knows who he's going to take the votes away from. He sounds like a more calm Donald Trump. I hate to say it. Is that Kennedy literally is still back there just with everyone that wants a selfie, everyone that wants to chat. It's really cool. He sounds like a more calm Donald Trump. Has some really cool ideas, without saying drain the swamp, he's talking about draining the swamp. He's talking about getting rid of BlackRock and these other companies that are really running everything. I'm headed to Poland tomorrow, and he talked about his family and the Kennedys in Poland, which is kind of cool because I'm going to the places that he talked about like next week, completely unplanned. But I do have to say, if he did have any kind of level of support above like that 3 or 4%, I'd be a Kennedy supporter. The problem is who that 3 or 4% is going to pull from. So, this is Richard coming to you from the Adrian Arst Center after hearing from, not John, Robert. Robert Kennedy. John Kennedy was the ex-president. And I hope you enjoyed. This is not to give any political opinion whatsoever, but to give you a view, as he was saying, to give you a view that the media won't give you. Again, this is Richard coming to you from the Adrian Arst Center with some clips of Kennedy, a photo with Kennedy, and everything like that, reminding you that when you wear no pants, there's only one thing you got left to lose, and that is your shirt. Thanks, Kennedy. It was a time. Have a great one. Bye.